I'd like to open with a story of the wise men of Chelm, this fictional village of fools whose quaint stupidity can be quite instructive. And quite often from these silly stories of Chelm, we can derive some great messages about life. So here's a classic. A citizen of Chelm is about to go to the village bathhouse when suddenly he has this panic attack because it dawns on him that in the bathhouse, when no one's wearing clothes, everyone looks alike. So he has this terrifying thought, what if I don't know who I am? What if I can't figure out who I am? Who's the real me? So he goes to the wise man of Chelm and he says, dear sage, I have this fear. If I go to the bathhouse, once I'm in the bath, I won't know who's who because we all look alike. So the wise man of Chelm comes up with a brilliant solution. Take a piece of red string, put it on your toe, tie it on your toe, and this way you'll always know who you are because you'll take a look and you'll see the red thread and you'll know that that's you. He goes to the bathhouse. He's now secure in his identity. Unfortunately, in the process of going into the bath, the red string came off his toe, and it happened to float right onto the toe of another fellow. Now he's out of the bathhouse. He takes a look down on his toe. There's no red thread there. He takes a look at the other fellow. There's a red thread on his toe. Wow, he's baffled. He goes over to the fellow next to him and he says, I know who you are, but who am I? Silly but profound. Because every thinking person asks themselves this question, who am I? And when we can't come up with a satisfactory answer, we look for things that might provide us with some elusive identity. Whether it's our careers, or we come up with our titles, or our possessions. But the truth is that those are red strings. They're not our essential beings. Garry Kasparov was the Russian world chess champion, and he recently spoke at a graduating class at St. Louis University where he told a fascinating story. He said when he won the world championship in 1985, he was 22 years old. It was the greatest day of my life. There I was, standing on the stage with my flowers and my medal, the happiest man in the world. And suddenly I was approached by Rona Petrosian. Rona was the widow of a former world chess champion from the 60s. I was expecting her to offer some words of congratulations, but she had something else in mind. She said, young man, I feel so sorry for you. Sorry for me? I just won the world chess championship at the age of 22 years old. Why would you feel sorry for me? I'm on top of the world. And she said, I feel sorry for you because the happiest day of your life is now over. I couldn't believe it. What a stupid thing for her to say to me. But before I got over my shock, I began to wonder, what if she's right? What if this is the happiest day of my life? And therefore, at the age of 22, I've just experienced the happiest day of my life. What does that mean for the rest of it? And so I slowly came to realize that Rona Petrosian gave me a new goal in life, to prove her wrong. I made sure that life after World Chess Championship would always be filled with purpose and with mission. Kasparov's point is a very powerful one. If our existence is all about the trappings of fame, if it's about the adulation, if our lives revolve around the acknowledgement and approval of others, what happens when that stops? Do we no longer exist? Is it all downhill from there? Rabbi Simon Jacobson last night in one of his talks quoted a great saying from Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Kutsk. It sounds rather cryptic, but see if you can follow this. He said, if I am, because I am, and you are because you are, then I am and you are. But if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not and you are not. The point is quite simple. If my identity depends on your identity, and your identity depends on my identity, then neither of us have identities of our own. Those who follow sports know that there's something called the home team advantage. That all things being equal, the team playing at their home field, their home stadium, its own arena, has a better chance of winning the game than the visiting team. So a couple of years ago, these two authors got together and they actually wrote a book about this phenomenon. And they used various statistics. They were able to actually prove that there is something of the home team advantage, that it's true. It's not a myth. It does indeed exist, and it can be proven. But what was really interesting about this book and about their findings and conclusions is to why it exists. I always believed there was a home team advantage. But I thought it was because the fans pumped up their home team and it gave them extra momentum. Then when you got up and everyone was screaming for you, for some reason they gave you this advantage because you really wanted to hit that home run even more, because you worked out more, because you wanted to show off in front of your home fans. They found that not to be the reason for the home field advantage. I also thought because teams, especially in baseball, stack their players to fit the type of field they have in their stadium. So if they have a short right field wall, they'll get batters that can hit to right field. And I felt that would be the reason for the home team advantage. And their findings was that it wasn't so. It wasn't because they were used to playing in a particular arena. And on they went in this book to dispel some of the reasons we all thought why there would be a home team advantage. So what was it? Can anyone guess what the reason for the home team advantage is? Yes. Wasn't the fan noise? Yes. That was another reason that I also believed. The other team is flying in. They're not rested. You're rested. You slept in your own bed. It wasn't the reason. Yeah. Good, but it wasn't what they came up with. Yeah, one more in that, we'll move on. Huh? Last licks, good one, wasn't it? Yeah. Just the mindset, we're at home, so we're going to win. I also believe that? No. Here's their conclusion, shocking as it is. The officials, the referees, the umpires. You see, the most significant contribution to home field advantage, statistically speaking, and it can be backed up statistically, is that the refs and the umpires would more often rule in favor of a home team than the visiting team, and it wasn't a conspiracy. The officials are all upstanding professionals of honesty and integrity, and they're doing the best to be absolutely fair. But at the end of the day, they're only humans. And social influence and pressure is such a powerful force that it can affect a person's decisions and behavior without them even knowing it. As much as these officials are genuinely trying to be impartial, the human nature does not want to be booed by 50,000 people. So if the play is real close, right down the middle, they would be more in favor of going where the 50,000 fans would cheer rather than boo. And they themselves are not aware that they're doing it, but it just happens subconsciously. Shocking. But is it really shocking? We don't realize ourselves how so many of the decisions we make in our lives has the same perspective. The opinions we express are being formed and influenced by views and attitudes that are not inherently our own. I think it's especially true in today's culture of social media, of Facebook and Twitter. Everybody and their cousin has a blog, a podcast, a periscope, some sort of megaphone to the world. There are no longer boundaries between people's private selves and their public selves. And how much of it is real? People obviously only post images that they want others to see. You tend to think, you know what? How come I'm the only unhappy person in the world today? Everyone out there is happy. You start going through Facebook, everybody's smiling, everyone's having a great time. Look at me, I'm at the beach. Look at me, I'm in Hawaii. Look at me, I'm eating sushi at a restaurant. And they're always smiling. Every selfie, they're smiling. And you begin to believe that you're the only unhappy person on the face of the earth. So what do? You smile too. You take a picture, you put it out there. This is so much of a problem of today's social interaction, especially for our younger generation, that we're creating a false world out there. And that's why it's all the more important than ever that we be in touch with our own inner truths. We spend so much energy looking over our shoulders, wondering what the next person thinks of us. Are they laughing at me? Do they think I'm smart? Do they think I'm stupid? Do they think I'm weird? Do they think I'm crazy? Chances are they're not really paying attention to you at all. In the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, you wouldn't worry what others think of you if you realized how little they do. They're too busy living their own lives and worrying what other people think of them to actually worry about you. They're so caught up in their own stuff that you don't really register a blip. So you get these clicks on the mouse and everything is about how many thumbs up and how many likes did I get. True, we're only human. And human nature, we want to be liked and we want to be accepted. Nobody enjoys being booed and scorned and mocked, not even umpires in a stadium. But the question is, at what cost? At what price are we surrendering our own identity and our own individuality? This is your life. It's your life. It's difficult enough to live it for yourself. Why do you try to live it for folks who hardly know you? Have you ever heard of Jobbik, otherwise known as the Movement for a Better Hungary? It's an ultra-nationalist Hungarian political party that's aligned with a neo-Nazi, racist, anti-Semitic philosophy. Among the things that Jobbik espouses are the good old prejudices that Jews are trying to control the world. They believe in all the protocols of Zion stuff. The scary thing is that in the year 2014, Jobbik secured over 20% of the votes, making it the third largest political party in Hungary. Until 2012, the leading member of the Jobbik party was a very charismatic politician in his late 20s named Sanad Szegedy. Szegedy was a rising star in the movement. He was a darling of the party. He was often spoken as a candidate to become its future leader. One day, as it goes in politics, some members of the party who wanted to stop Szegedy's rise did some digging and began to spread rumors that he was of Jewish ancestry. As these rumors continued to swirl, Szegedy decided to visit his 92-year-old maternal grandmother to find out, to do some research on his own. And he started questioning her about her past. His grandmother, while staring into the eyes of her grandson, rolled up her sleeve. And there, tattooed on her arm, was the numbers that the Nazis had burned into her arm in Auschwitz. She told him that she and his grandfather were indeed Jewish, and they were survivors of Auschwitz. He learned that half of his family was killed during the Holocaust. He learned that in their youth before the war, both of his grandparents were actually Torah observant. But after Auschwitz, they decided to hide their identity completely. When Sanad's mother was 14, her father told her to keep it a secret. and gave a very strict instructions never to reveal it to anyone. And suddenly here, Sanad Zagadi learns the truth. I just broke down, he said. I couldn't absorb what my grandmother was telling me. It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? Imagine you dedicate your entire life to fight and despise Jews, and then you find out you are one. Imagine you spend your whole life explaining that Jews made up the Holocaust, and then you find out that your entire family was wiped out in the Holocaust, and it's the only reason your identity was kept secret. What did he do? He resigned from the party, decided to find out more about Judaism. He located the local Chabad emissary, Rabbi Shlomo Kovs. At first, Rabbi Shlomo, who knew of who this individual was, thought this was some type of bad joke. And then he came to understand this was no joke at all. He was sincere. He arranged for him to attend classes. And since then, he has learned Hebrew. He's become well-versed in Torah. In 2013, he underwent a circumcision. He changed his name to David. He goes to shul. He wears a kippah. He keeps Shabbos. He keeps kosher. When he first came clean and admitted the truth about his Jewish ancestry, one of his former friends in the Yabik party said, the best thing we can do is shoot you right now, so at least you'll be buried a pure Hungarian. Another urged him to make a public apology, to which he responded, let me understand, I'm supposed to apologize for the fact that my family was killed at Auschwitz? Sanad Zagedi's awareness of his true identity made him realize what a sick thing he had allowed himself to get caught up with, all the while basking in the praise and admiration of those around him. And since then, in the last few years, he's been using his political skills to try and defend human rights in Hungary for everyone. That's what you call being true to yourself. When you discover who yourself really, truly is. A Jew who is in touch with their Yiddishkeit says, I'm an individual created for the specific purpose of fulfilling God's will as revealed to us in the Torah. That's my identity. And as such, those are the values, those are the principles that I live by each and every day of my life. It's my identity regardless where I am or what I do. And when you're in touch with that inner truth, you can withstand the most intense onslaught of social pressure, no matter where it comes from or who it comes from. In 1941, the first Rosh Hashanah that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was in America. He wasn't Rebbe yet, but he urged the members of the Crown Heights community who were planning to go over to the lake in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens for the Tashlich service, not to walk there as individuals, as small groups, but to go together as a parade, march together in the streets of Brooklyn, and that they should sing on the way, and they should be proud of their identity, and they should be joyful of the holiday. Now, this wasn't a time when American Jews were generally were public. They were very private at the time, especially when it came to religious behavior. You didn't want to bring attention to yourself. Among the group was a yeshiva student named Zalman Posner, who went on to become a renowned rabbi in Nashville, Tennessee. And he would later recall that instruction to walk together, to sing in the streets, to walk as a parade, to be proud publicly who you are. And he says honestly that he was quite uncomfortable when he heard these instructions as to, we're going to offend people singing in the streets in public. As it turns out, Posner was lagging a little behind the rest of the group. And suddenly this well-dressed gentleman, by all appearances a non-observant Jew, approached him and said, why are they singing? Why are they singing? What are they singing? Gathering from the man's tone, he thought this fellow was offended, like he was afraid was going to happen, and he started to hem and haw. But before he can get out a response, the man said, it feels so good. There's something alive in me. Jews are singing in the streets of Brooklyn. It's great. And he began to realize how right the Rebbe was. Be proud of your identity. Don't hide it anymore. And that was just a touch of what was to come later. Menorahs in shopping malls, menorahs at city halls, menorahs at governor's mansions, menorahs everywhere. Mitzvah tanks in every street corner. Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish? Would you like to put on tefillin? Here on the street of Manhattan. The Rebbe would make us proud of our identity. Parades on Lag BaOmer. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, the Rebbe sought to inspire our people to stand up straight again. Not like before, but straighter and stronger than ever before. As a result, it has never been easier, more practical, more accessible to live as a Jew as it is today. Because what we find is that more often than not, people out there respect those who stand up for their own principles and their own convictions. I'm not talking about the anti-Semites and the haters. They certainly should have no say in how we live our lives. But by and large, we find that the non-Jewish world today has respect for a Jew who lives true to his or her own traditions and ideals. You may remember this from the news a little less than a year ago. Pope Francis had a meeting with Israel's President Reuven Rivlin in Rome. Also in attendance at this meeting was President Rivlin's chief of staff. Her name is Mrs. Rivka Ravitz. Rivka is a Torah-observant woman. She was 39 at the time. She's the mother of 11 children, holds 2 degrees in computer and political science, and is currently working towards her PhD in public policy. Now, the protocol, when one meets the Pope, is for the visitor to shake the pontiff's hand and bow. When Mrs. Ravitz appeared before the Pope, she explained to him respectfully that she could not shake his hand, as her tradition does not allow for her to shake a man's hand, and that she could not bow since he was wearing a cross, and Jewish law precluded her from doing that as well. Without missing a beat, the Pope covered the cross he was wearing around his neck and bowed to her. Think about this for a moment. For close to 2 millennia, the church participated in hunting down our people, depriving them of dignity, liberty, and basic human rights. Millions were killed because the Jewish people refused to bow down and embrace the cross. Today, the Pope encounters a Jew who's not ashamed of her history, not ashamed of her heritage, not ashamed of her belief and her adherence to Torah. Not only does he not find it offensive, on the contrary, he bows to her. He feels privileged to be in her presence. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Jew, it's time for us to be ourselves. Stop hiding. Stop worrying so much about what others will think. Be you. Be proud. And stand tall. Back in May of 2015, a 22-year-old college senior by the name of Don Greenberg was about to graduate from Binghamton University School of Engineering. He was nominated to give the commencement address. However, when he learned that the ceremony was to take place on Saturday, it seemed as though he would have to decline the nomination because Don was a Shabbos-observant college kid, and he wouldn't be able to use the microphone needed to address the huge crowd. When he explained this to the school's administrator, they could have easily said, okay, we offered it to you, you can't, and selected the next person on the list. But instead they inquired as to what kind of accommodations could be made. They could indeed deliver the speech after all. What did they end up doing at Binghamton University? On the Wednesday before graduation, Don Greenberg stood at a podium before a blue screen. He was dressed in the full graduation clothing, and he delivered his speech in front of a video camera. The recording was then played on Saturday before 2,500 students and their families. The speech was greeted warmly, but when Don Greenberg explained in his video commencement address why he was not there live in person, about the holiness of the Sabbath, and that this day was for the sanctity of God and for family, it brought about a rousing standing ovation from the crowd. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Jew, it's time for us to be ourselves. Be you, stand proud, and stand tall. When Louis Brandeis was still a student at Harvard Law School in 1876, his brilliance was already quite apparent to his professors and fellow students. But he didn't have it easy. For 3 years, students would taunt him. They would sit next to him at lunch and they would say, Brandeis, you're brilliant. You know, you can end up on the Supreme Court. If only you weren't a Jew. You should convert. It will help your career. You'll get so much further in life. All your problems will be solved. Brandeis would never say a word. He would never respond. By his final year in law school, Brandeis' brilliance could no longer be denied. And Jewish or not, he was invited to join the Honor Society. A Jew entering into Harvard's Honor Society was the first time ever in its history. It was an electric moment. On the evening of the official induction into the Honor Society, the room was hushed. The atmosphere was thick. All eyes were on Brandeis as he walked to the lectern. And slowly he looked around the room and he said the following: I am sorry that I was born a Jew. With that, the room erupted in applause. There was an explosion of shouts and cheers. You see, the fellow students said, we got through to him, we convinced him, finally he sees our point. Brandeis waited for the room to calm down. And when silence finally resumed, he began again. I am sorry that I was born a Jew, but only because I would have wished I had the privilege of choosing Judaism on my own. I'd like to think that even had I not been born a Jew, I'd have recognized and appreciated the honor and the privilege of being one. At first, there was only silence. And then the members of the exclusive Harvard Honor Society began to stand. No, they didn't walk out. They were so in awe of Brandeis' conviction and character that the members of the society gave this individual a standing ovation. It's time for us to be ourselves. It all comes down to a mindset and approach. When we are comfortable, when we're confident in our own skin and our own choices, then those around us are comfortable with them as well. It's when we're insecure with our identity, or we feel we have to apologize for our identity, or we have to make excuses for our traditions and our positions, that's when we run into trouble. I say this as it relates to our own lives individually, and as it relates to our people collectively. I say this especially as it relates to Israel. I think we should all know by now that when it comes to its survival, Israel can ill afford to base its decisions on world opinion. Nor can it seek validation for its existence from the United Nations and other such bastions of Israel hatred. It has never been a winning formula for Israel to try to please and appease the world. A Jew does what he knows to be right in the eyes of God and makes no apologies and excuses for it to anybody. And when we're true to ourselves, when we know who we are, when we're proud of who we are, we allow the Jewish spark to shine so brightly. We allow our Jewish soul to reveal itself. And who are we? The Torah identifies the Jewish people as a nation of Kohanim, a nation of priests, a nation of leaders. We're supposed to be trendsetters, not trend followers. Each of us, in one way or another, is called upon to be a leader. And you say, me? A leader? Are you kidding? I can't get my own act together. How am I supposed to be a leader to others? A leader has to be decisive. I can't decide what shoes to wear in the morning. I'm shy. I don't like the limelight. Leadership, it's not for me. You see, I'm not talking about running for president here, although that would probably be an improvement of what we have right now. Jewish leadership comes in many different shapes, sizes, and wrappings. You don't have to be a Menachem Begin or a Queen Esther to qualify. All you have to be is yourself, your true self. When I was a rabbinic student in Boston in 1981, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I went to rabbinical school in Brookline, Massachusetts. The Rebbe announced a campaign called Tzivos Hashem, the Army of Hashem. He wanted youth groups for Jewish children to be established in every city in the world. So our yeshiva was given the responsibility to establish these youth groups for the greater New England region. And then the question came up as to who would head this department. For a reason unbeknownst to me, the headmaster called me in and told me that I was nominated for the position. I said, by whom? He said, by me. I was 17 years old at the time. I tried very hard not to laugh at the preposterous suggestion of a 17-year-old kid leading up this Tzivos Hashem movement for the entire New England region. And here I was being asked to take on a position to hold mass rallies in front of hundreds of kids and charm them and excite them and delight them. But he insisted. And to make a long story short, I threw myself completely into it and things took off. As a result of that, I realized that I can speak in public. I never knew I could. I was, and I still am. For those that know me know this to be true. I'm a very shy person. But this ability to get up in public, I found out about myself when I was 17 years old, when my headmaster said, you're going to lead the rallies for Tzivos Hashem. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs would often say, a good leader creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. The Rebbe inspired all of us to be leaders, all of us, me and each and every single one of you. He showed us that you don't have to have the piety of Moses. You don't have to have the courage of Joshua. You don't have to have the charisma of King David. You don't have to have the wisdom of King Solomon to be a leader in your environment. You just need to want to make a difference. You need to be yourself, your true self, your best self, your fullest and deepest self, and you need to care. You need to be concerned. You need to be compassionate. You need to care about other human beings. That's who we are as a Jewish people. That's what we are. That's what it means to be true to ourselves. Aaron David Newman is a man who lives today in Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. And he recently shared the following story. In 1940, he was a 6-year-old boy living in Antwerp, Belgium, when the Germans invaded Belgium and immediately began deporting and killing Jews. He recalled how his family fled across the border to France, making their way to the city of Marseille. His maternal grandmother lived there, and that's why they ran there. The problem was that there wasn't enough food or adequate shelter to handle the influx of refugees. And so they moved from house to house. A few months later, the Nazis invaded Paris, and the situation got even worse. Amidst all the chaos and upheaval, his family was forced to split up. Little David, who went by the affectionate name Duvidal, was sent to an orphanage in Marseille. The orphanage housed some 40 or 50 children. Many of them were 3 or 4 years old. Some of them knew that their mothers and fathers had been killed. Others did not know what became of them. David recalled how he would often hear children crying, calling out their parents' names in the middle of the night, and there was no one there to answer. As the days wore on, the situation grew more and more desperate, and the food became more and more scarce. There were many days in which the children went hungry. Then in the summer of 1941, a man came to the rescue. We didn't know his name, said Aaron David. We just called him Monsieur, which is French for Mister. And every day, Monsieur would arrive with bags of bread, with these long French baguettes, and he would have tuna fish and sardines with him. Sometimes he had potatoes too. And he would stay in the orphanage until every child had something to eat. Some of the kids were so despondent that they didn't want to eat. And this stranger, this man, this Monsieur would take those children on his lap. He would tell them a story, he would sing to them, and he would feed them by hand. He made sure every single child was fed. With some of the children, he would sit next to them on the floor and coax them to eat, even feeding them with a spoon if need be. He became a father to these sad children. In fact, I remember there was one boy who was jealous. He also wanted to sit on Monsieur's lap and hear songs and stories, so he pretended not to eat, just so that he can get the attention from this beautiful man. Monsieur knew every child by name, even though we didn't know his. We loved him and we looked forward to his visits. He came day after day during that difficult summer. And I would say that many of the children who lived in that orphanage at the time owed their lives to him. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. After the war, Aaron David Newman was reunited with his family. They left Europe and began their lives anew, settling in Williamsburg. One day in 1957, his uncle suggested that he go meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe to receive a blessing. An appointment was arranged and he came to Chabad headquarters at 770 Eastern Parkway. After an extended wait, it was finally his turn. And he walked into the Rebbe's office. And as he recalls it, the Rebbe looked at him. And suddenly the Rebbe had this huge, bright smile. And the Rebbe said, Duvidel. Das ist mein Duvidel. This is my Duvidel. How does the Rebbe know my name? I didn't introduce myself. And then he says, I nearly fainted because I was looking at Monsieur. The Rebbe was that stranger. I had no idea. He recognized me before I recognized him. The Rebbe was in France during that time and would often travel between Nice and Marseille, which is when he found out about the orphanage and the plight of the poor children, and he came to the rescue. He wasn't there as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He wasn't there as one of the greatest scholars and leaders of our century. He was there simply as a caring Jew. He was being himself. No fanfare, no spotlight. You know, from my office window at my office in Agoura Hills, I have this magnificent view. I see this beautiful mountain. It's called Lady Face Mountain. And it's indeed stunning to look at each and every single day. But there's something else I see from my window that's even more beautiful. You see, we have a food bank where we distribute food on a weekly basis to dozens of families who unfortunately don't have the means to feed their own children. And across the parking lot, we have this big blue bin where people come to contribute food, to drop off food during the week that we use to feed those in need. Do you know how beautiful it is to see cars pulling up, dropping off shopping bags of food every day? To even see elderly seniors coming and schlepping their bags to put it in the bin. To see parents with little children educating their children when they go shopping that they buy extra food and have their kids put in one item at a time into this bin. And then to watch hours later as other vehicles pull up to take home food for hungry children. Far more beautiful than Lady Face Mountain. to see chesed, to see kindness, to see people caring, to see a human heart, to see a soul. There's a pediatrician in Israel who tells the story how one evening he was on call at the hospital and he saw a young woman, a bride. She was wearing her wedding gown and she's walking the halls of the pediatric ward. It was a curious sight. So he asked her, "Is anything wrong? Why are you here dressed in your wedding gown?" And so she explained that it was right after her chuppah, that she just got married moments ago. And she was taught that the day of a wedding, the chassan and kala are balei schus. They have special merit, and they have a special power to bestow blessings upon others. So I came here, she said, to bless these children so that they should have a complete and speedy recovery. This is the day of her wedding. She hasn't walked into the reception hall yet. She hasn't taken her chassan kala pictures yet. Do you remember what you were like at your wedding or at your children's wedding? Could you imagine stopping everything and saying, "Stop, hold the music. I need to go to a hospital ward to visit some children to give them a blessing"? That's being ourselves. That's being who we are. That's allowing this chesed, this kindness of the Jew, this compassion of the Jew to come forward. We are trendsetters. We are leaders. We don't stand by the sidelines. We roll up our sleeves and we do what needs to be done. You're familiar with the story of the greatest public servant of the Jewish people. His name is Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. He took our ancestors out of Egypt. Moshe, who gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. Moshe, who led us for 40 years in the desert and turned a family of slaves into a nation of princes. How did Moshe come to take this job? What was his reaction when God called upon him? So let's take a look. God comes to Moses and says, "Moses, I want you to take my people out of Egypt." And what does Moses say? "Mi anochi," who am I? Me? I should take them out of Egypt? You got the wrong guy. God comes back to Moses and says, "Moses, I want you to take the job." Moses says, "I can't. I'm handicapped. I have a speech impediment." A leader has to be able to communicate. A leader has to be able to get up and motivate the masses. I'm not a speaker. You got the wrong guy. Can't do it. God comes back to Moses and says, "Moses, I want you to take the job." He says, "I'm sorry, I can't take the job. I have an older brother, Aaron. He's older than me. How's it going to look that you picked the younger brother over the older brother? He's going to be humiliated. Can't do it." This goes on, by the way, for a week. For 7 days, God is arguing with Moses. And Moses says, "I can't take the job." And God says, "Take the job." "I can't take the job." "Take the job." "I got family issues. I can't take the job." You've got to wonder, why didn't God just come to Moses and say, "Moses, I'll tell you what. As far as the problem with your brother, don't worry about it. I'll take care of Aaron. I'll make him the high priest. He'll be fine. As for your speech impediment, no problem. I'm God, remember? Tomorrow morning, Moses, you're going to wake up and you'll suddenly be the greatest orator on this planet. You're going to have a silver tongue. You'll be eloquent. You'll no longer stutter. Your words will just roll off." Why didn't God just do that? Why does he keep this argument going for 7 days? He's God. Deal with the problems. The answer, I believe, is that God is teaching us. God is teaching you and me and every human being a lesson for all time. You don't have to be perfect to take the job. You don't have to be a natural. You don't have to be the greatest this or the greatest that. You don't have to be the smartest or the most talented. You can have your handicaps. You can have your faults. You can have your imperfections. You don't have to be the best as long as you have one thing. What's that one thing? God says to Moshe, "Ki eya imach," I will be with you. When you have the faith and the belief that God is with you, assisting you, watching you. There's nothing you can't accomplish. We all want to be good and do good, but we often lack the oomph and the boldness, the conviction to act, the courage to take risks. So we remain frozen on the sidelines and we miss opportunities for greatness. We have to learn to be ourselves. What is heroism? Heroism is character. And character means doing the right thing, even and especially when it's difficult or inconvenient. We all have such character within us so that in a heroic moment we can change the world and inspire others to follow the lead. Last summer, the world was riveted by the story of 3 Americans who, while vacationing in Europe, found themselves on a high-speed train from Amsterdam to Paris. You may remember this when a Muslim terrorist armed to the teeth shot one person who was about to murder who knows how many innocents on board. A split second after these Americans, 2 of them ex-servicemen, realized what was going on. They shouted, "Let's go," and charged straight at the terrorist and subdued him, saving dozens of lives. I think that in a far less dramatic sense, we're all passengers on a high-speed train of life. Each of us has the potential to be a hero in our circumstances. It doesn't have to be a headline-grabbing feat to be heroic. Any act which we are motivated by higher truth and deeper sense of decency and compassion to go out of our way to make life better for others is heroic in its own right. A person who sees an elderly person struggling with something to get from one place to another, and rather than be a bystander, goes out of his way to lend a helping hand is a hero of sorts. A person who hears Israel or Judaism being mocked or criticized and takes the stand without fear or embarrassment is a hero of sorts. As a wise man once said, true heroism is folks who go about their tasks without fanfare or fame, but whose influence is like a pebble in the pond that creates ripples that spread far and wide. On the subject of heroes, I think it behooves us, each and every single one of us, to recognize the heroes in our own lives that are closest to us, that are closest to our own hearts, namely our parents. Whether we think our parents did a great job or not such a great job, by and large, they are and they'll always remain our heroes. Around 5 years ago, I went back east to attend the wedding of one of my nephews. During the groom's reception, my uncle and I were standing at the back of the room. My uncle said, "Look at your father's face. Look at how happy and proud he is sitting next to his son and his grandson." This uncle's my mother's brother. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Eckhouse. All of my father's 5 siblings were killed during the Holocaust. But ever since my father married my mother, my uncle Yankel was a brother to him in every way. And then my uncle's eyes filled with tears, and he said, such a special Yid, such a special Jew your father is, such a good man. After everything he suffered during the war, and then losing 2 children of his own, and yet his faith and his piety and his devotion were never shaken. But Moshe, above anything else, do you know what your father's motto in life has always been? Alles für die Kinder. Everything for the children. Alles für die Kinder. There's nothing in the world he wouldn't do for you, his dear children. And standing there with my uncle gazing at my father's beaming face, it struck me how true that was. Alles für die Kinder. Having to quit his job as a Rebbe in yeshiva when earning $110 a week would not quite support a family of 11 children. Working one job during the day in Manhattan, coming home to serve us supper and do our homework, and then going to another job in a real estate office in Borough Park. Alles für die Kinder. All for the children. Everything he did in life was all about his children, all about us. Sometimes it makes me shudder when I wonder if I ever showed him nearly enough of how much I admired, loved, and appreciated him, and the sacrifices he made for us. It makes me shudder to think of how much I miss him, and will never stop missing him. But I know his story is not unique. We can all reflect upon the sacrifices our parents made on our behalfs. From the day we were born, through all the other stuff we put them through. How they gave and they gave and they gave to their kids just for the sake of giving. And how they loved us unconditionally. And how they gifted us so many special memories we can hold on to and cherish forever. But the good news, my friends, is that we can still give them nachas. We can still make them proud by being the best selves right here, right now. By showing them that we have learned from them and from the models that they put before us to be ourselves, to stand strong, to stand tall. I want to close with a short story. There used to be a joke they told in Paris. It went something like this. What's the difference between the chief rabbi of France and the cardinal of Paris? And the joke, the answer was that the cardinal spoke Yiddish and the chief rabbi didn't. There was truth to it. You may remember that Cardinal Jean Lustiger served as cardinal to Paris for 24 years, died a few years ago. To me, his story is one of irony, tragedy, pain, and paradox. He was born in 1926 to Jewish parents from Poland. He was born as Aaron Lustiger. He was named at his bris. He was 13 years old when Germany marched into France, and fearing for his life, his parents sent him and his sisters into hiding with a Catholic family in Orleans. While in hiding, Aaron changed his name to Jean-Marie and converted to Catholicism. His parents learned of this and were devastated. His mother was captured and sent to Auschwitz, where she was murdered in 1943. Even after the war, Jean-Marie stayed within the church. He was brilliant and he was charming. He continued to rise within the ranks from chaplain to pastor, from bishop to archbishop, and finally made cardinal in 1983. He was a confidant and close advisor to Pope John Paul. As a matter of fact, Lustiger's name was among those considered to succeed John Paul. When someone asked him what he thought about that, the prospect of a Jewish pope, he ironically responded in Yiddish, "Von dein Maul zu Gottes Ohren," from your mouth to God's ears. He then joked, wow, what would that do to all the anti-Semites? All throughout, his Jewish soul gave him no rest. He continued to insist that he was Jewish, fulfilling some special calling. When his actions were condemned or his identity was called into question, he would cry out, "Don't deny me my father and my mother, my grandfathers and my grandmothers. I am Jewish as all the other members of my family that were butchered in Auschwitz and other camps." In 1999, as Cardinal of Paris, he took part in France's Day of Remembrance for Jews who had been deported and exterminated during the Holocaust. During the highly publicized ceremony, he read from a list from the victims, each and every one of their names. He then came to a name on the list, Giselle Lustiger. He stopped, and tears came to his eyes, and he simply said, "Mein Mama." As per the request that he left in his will, the funeral for Cardinal Lustiger was to take place at the Notre Dame Cathedral, but is to begin with the recital of Kaddish. As I said, this is a story of tragedy and paradox, contradictions and inconsistency. It's the story of the Jewish soul that always tries to claw its way back to the forefront, even when it's buried in the strangest of places. But let me tell you what I find most tragic about the story. In a conversation with his biographer, Lustiger shared the fact that back in 1970s, he went through a spiritual crisis, as he called it. He studied Hebrew and was seriously considering making Aliyah to Israel to rejoin his people, his heritage, his tradition, to find new meaning and purpose in life. But just as he was about to make the move, the Pope called upon him and appointed him Bishop of Orleans, and the rest is history. It is a tragedy. I think what could have been, and who many would have followed, that moment of awakening that he had to be true to himself, to allow the soul to come forward. to allow the Judaism to come out, to listen to those whispers, what it would have done for his soul and what it would have done for his parents. My friends, as we leave today this retreat, let us take from all that we have gathered the past 6 days, those that were here from Tuesday, from all the hundreds of hours that we invested in learning and studying and being inspired. And let's remember, stand tall, stand strong, be proud of who you are. And when that moment of awakening comes, don't hide from it, don't run from it, but embrace it. Thank you very much.